Imagine this. You're walking down the street and you bump into someone. They smile, apologize, and keep walking. Everything about them feels completely normal. Their words, their expressions, their movements all seem just as you'd expect. But here's the twist. Inside their mind, there's nothing. No experience of redness when they see a rose. No taste when they sip their coffee. No inner monologue. They behave just like you, but the lights are off inside. This is the unsettling thought experiment known as the philosophical zombie, or P-zombie. In philosophy, a P-zombie isn't the brain-eating creature from horror movies. It's a purely hypothetical being, physically identical to a human, down to every atom, but without conscious experience. If you poked one with a needle, they'd recoil and say, "Ouch," but there would be no inner sensation of pain, no raw feeling, no what it's like to be hurt. They're not numb in the physical sense. Their body reacts exactly as yours does. They're numb in the deepest sense. Nothing registers in the theater of their mind, because there is no theater at all. The concept of the P-zombie comes from discussions about the hard problem of consciousness, a term made famous by philosopher David Chalmers in the 1990s. The so-called easy problems of consciousness are things like, how do we detect edges in vision? How does the brain integrate information? How do we control speech and movement? These are easy, not because they're simple, but because science can, in principle, explain them in physical terms. The hard problem is different. It asks, why is there anything it's like to be you? Why do brain processes produce subjective experience at all? And here's where the P-zombie becomes important. Imagine a world physically identical to ours. Same atoms, same history. But in that world, every human is a P-zombie. From the outside, they're indistinguishable from us. From the inside, there's nothing. If such a world is logically possible, then consciousness is not something you can reduce purely to physical processes. Because, if the physical facts are identical, but conscious experience is missing, then consciousness must be something extra, something beyond the physical facts. Chalmers used this idea to argue that physicalism, the view that everything about the mind can be explained physically, might be incomplete. To understand this, you need to understand the concept of qualia, the raw feels of experience, the redness of red, the bitterness of coffee, the sound of a saxophone in a quiet room. Qualia are private. I can describe them to you, but I can't transmit my exact experience into your mind. A P-zombie has no qualia at all, yet still acts as though it does. It will say, "This strawberry tastes amazing," but it's not actually tasting anything. It's simply running the program. Why do philosophers care? Because if P-zombies are possible, even as a thought experiment, then consciousness is not automatically tied to the physical brain. That means there's a gap between what physics explains and what it's like to be a conscious subject. For some, this gap suggests consciousness might require non-physical properties, something beyond neurons and computation. Others think it means we need to rethink what we mean by physical altogether. Not everyone accepts the idea. One major objection is that if a being is physically identical to a human, it cannot lack consciousness. The very fact that it behaves like a conscious person means it must be conscious. This is the view of many materialists, that consciousness is identical to brain processes, even if that's not obvious to us right now. Another objection is that the very idea of a P-zombie is incoherent, like imagining a square circle. It sounds meaningful, but when you unpack it, it contradicts itself. Philosopher Dennett argues that if you imagine something that behaves exactly like a conscious person, you have imagined a conscious person, whether you meant to or not. Dennett calls the P-zombie an intuition pump, a mental trick that pushes your intuitions in a certain direction without proving anything. The thought experiment makes us feel like consciousness could be absent without changing behavior. But that feeling might just be a result of our fuzzy intuitions. If you fully account for what it means to behave like a conscious human in every detail, you've already included consciousness. The P-zombie idea also has a close relative, the inverted spectrum thought experiment. Imagine two people who both call roses red and grass green. But in one person's mind, the colors are flipped. Their red is your green, and their green is your red. They'd never know, because their behavior stays the same. This is another way to challenge the idea that behavior and consciousness are perfectly linked. In recent years, P-zombies have stepped into debates about artificial intelligence. Could a future AI pass every test for consciousness, speak, solve problems, even show emotions, and still be a P-zombie? Some argue yes. The AI might simulate consciousness without having it. Others argue that if it can do everything a conscious human can do, then it is conscious in the only way that matters. Science has a difficult time here. There is no experiment that can directly detect consciousness. We infer it in others from behavior and by analogy to ourselves. But by definition, a P-zombie passes all those tests. That's why the concept remains purely philosophical. It's not something you can detect, only imagine. So why should you care about a hypothetical creature that may not even be possible? Because the P-zombie question forces you to think about the nature of your own mind. It makes you ask, is consciousness something the brain does, or something the brain has? Could a machine ever really wake up? And how do you know you're not surrounded by P-zombies right now? For all you can tell, your friends and family could be P-zombies. Even I, the voice speaking to you now, could be one. And there's no test you could run to find out. At the end of the day, the P-zombie isn't about fear. It's a mirror reflecting the deepest mystery of existence. That from matter and motion, from atoms and chemistry, comes the private glow of experience, the redness of red, the pain of loss, the warmth of a smile. Whether P-zombies are logically possible or just a trick of language, they remind us that consciousness is not something we should take for granted. It's the most intimate, undeniable fact of our lives. And yet, perhaps, the hardest thing to explain. So next time you see someone smile, remember, you're not just seeing muscles move or neurons fire. You're seeing the trace of an invisible world, the rich, impossible first-person universe that is consciousness itself. And whether or not philosophical zombies could exist, the very act of wondering about them is proof that you, at least, are not one. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe for more mind-questioning ideas. And remember, the mind you're using right now to think about all this is the most mysterious thing you'll ever own.